Well, my public speaking career began 25 years ago and about 120 miles down I-35 from where we are right now. It was spring 1996. I was an 18-year-old high school senior, and I stood in front of VFW Post 3377, prepared to deliver my speech answering America's call. After I gave my speech, the post commanders presented me with a generous scholarship check and an unexpected gift, a white satin bomber jacket with my name embroidered on the front, and on the back in full color, a bald eagle and the Statue of Liberty superimposed on a waving American flag. My ever polite mother encouraged me to don this rather loud jacket for the photos. And you know what? I haven't found another suitable occasion to wear that jacket since then. But apart from my wardrobe and location, my speech today is different. The topic actually is remarkably similar: the importance of civic engagement and freedom to American democracy, and why that's important to me personally. But my perspective is different, and my message is different. If you had been in that VFW post, you would have heard me brag about the United States democracy as the envy of the world. You would have heard me talk about religious freedom for all and how everyone here can choose to practice or not practice their faith without fear of reprisal. But you see, I don't entirely believe that anymore. Don't get me wrong. I highly value religious freedom for all. In fact, I'm devoting my professional life to advocating for it. But I don't think we've ever really had full religious freedom in this country. I think it's an ideal that we've yet to realize. Now, of course, we have more religious observance, religious diversity, and religious tolerance here than in many other places around the world. Right now, millions of people are being interred and discriminated against and beaten and tortured and even killed for their religious beliefs. And we should never take for granted the relative freedom that we have to gather and worship and to express ourselves religiously in the public square without the government interfering with that. But religious tolerance is not the same as religious freedom. And Baptists have known that for a long time. Texas pastor George W. Truett, for whom the local seminary is named, preached on this very topic from the steps of the U.S. Capitol more than 100 years ago. He said that religious freedom is a right and toleration is a concession. Virginia Baptist pastor John Leland was even more direct in his condemnation of tolerance. He said it was despicable. Why? Well, if I can tolerate you, then I can also choose not to tolerate you. There's a power imbalance in toleration. But in freedom, there's equality. So what's keeping us locked in toleration and not achieving full religious freedom? Well, I think it's because we, the people, the American people, have never fully faced the poisons of racism and a political ideology and cultural framework called Christian nationalism. Christian nationalism suggests that to be a true American, one has to be a Christian. It privileges Christianity and Christians in American law and politics. It gives full cultural belonging to people who are white, Christian, native-born, and English-speaking, and implicitly creates second-class citizen status for everyone else. It rests on this mythical founding of the United States as a Christian nation, a glorified and fictionalized accounting of the past that sanctifies our founders and sacralizes our founding documents. It turns political actors, imperfect ones, into God's agents on earth, trying to carry out a special plan for America in history, leading all the way up to Judgment Day. And this narrative of a Christian nation is deeply seated. We can go all the way back to the doctrine of discovery, where European invaders used this doctrine to justify their conquest and genocide of the people they met here. If God wanted them to do this, after all, who were they to argue? And we saw it also in the religious colonies that legalized human bondage and used scripture to justify slavery. It was the Anglican Virginia Assembly in 1667 that passed a law that said that baptism would not free a person who was enslaved. Christian nationalism was used immediately after the American Revolution, when the country was young and looking for some prominence on the world stage, looking for unity for these disparate colonies, and looking for an identity that would set it apart from European empires. And so they turned political actors like George Washington into religious figures like Moses. They started using language about God's providential hand guiding America through history. We also saw Christian nationalism at work in our religious institutions. In the 1850s, when Presbyterians and Methodists and Baptists split over the issue of slavery, with churches in the South choosing allegiance to their slave states over their allegiance to the gospel's call to love our neighbor through freedom and equality. And the Civil War ended legalized slavery, but it didn't end racism and white supremacy. And so from the Civil War into the 20th century, we saw the founding and the flourishing of the KKK with its toxic mix of Christianity, white supremacy, and nationalism that terrorized Black and Jewish Americans. And the KKK was not a fringe group. They had chapters in the South and the North, where before 1930, membership in the North was estimated to be between 3 and 5 million members. These members were also often members in good standing at their churches. They would attend Sunday morning services and then attend Sunday afternoon public lynchings. And then we also saw Christian nationalism in the 1950s, in the Cold War, when Americans were terrified of communism, or even more terrified of being accused to be a communist. And so we saw political leaders tap into the language of Christian nationalism to make "In God We Trust" a national motto, and to add "Under God" to the Pledge of Allegiance. This quickly sketched history of Christian nationalism in the United States runs alongside a system that would create a better nation, one that is founded on religious freedom for all. Because those founders, they were not divinely inspired, but they did want political freedom from England. And in doing so, they repudiated a system that had religious establishments in the colonies. They chose a better way. They rejected a Christian nation in their documents in favor of a secular one. And so we have the First Amendment. Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion or prohibiting the free exercise thereof. But despite these legal protections, the pervasiveness and the persistence of Christian nationalism has meant there has always been a gap between the ideal of religious freedom and reality. There's a gap between who we say we are and who we really are. Let me give you another example. One of the key constitutional texts protecting religious freedom for all is Article 6 of the US Constitution, which says in part that there will be no religious tests for public office. The founders made a deliberate break with the custom in many of the states at the time that did require religious tests, that required office holders to swear an oath upholding certain religious tenets. The founders wanted something very different. But if we look at reality, we see that Christians have always been and continue to be vastly overrepresented in the US Congress. And those few members of Congress who don't claim a Christian identity, who either are not religious or who are from other faiths, are often attacked for their patriotism is often attacked because of their religious difference. Every single United States president has claimed a Christian identity. And with one exception, every single US president has been a white Christian. The one person who wasn't had his patriotism attacked, not just by the lies of birtherism, but by false claims that he was a Muslim. This is not religious freedom. This is Christian nationalism rearing its ugly head. And in this ongoing battle, this ongoing choice we have between who we say we are and who we really are, we are at a turning point. And that's because Christian nationalism is on the rise. A recent poll from the University of Maryland, taken just earlier this year, asked respondents, does the US Constitution allow the country to declare itself a Christian nation? 70% of Americans said no, reaffirming that core constitutional ideal of religious freedom. But then, when asked, should the United States declare itself a Christian nation, 4 out of 10 respondents said yes, it should. And when you look at just the Republican respondents to that question, it was even higher. 6 out of 10, a solid majority, said the US should be declared a Christian nation. This sentiment is being tapped into by extremists. Earlier this year, Marjorie Taylor Greene, a US representative, said she was a proud Christian nationalist and the Republican Party should become the party of Christian nationalism. Her colleague, Lauren Boebert, went one further and said it's the job of the church to direct the state. And in her words, she was tired of the separation of church and state junk. Andrew Torba, the creator of the extremist website Gab, said directly to Jewish Americans that he wasn't going to deport them, but they would need to learn to live in a Christian country under Christian laws. This rhetoric must be repudiated by both Republicans and Democrats if we are going to have a chance to stop Christian nationalism. But this is not just an esoteric constitutional law inquiry. This is not just rhetoric. This is literally killing our neighbors. Just ask the communities around Mother Emanuel AME Church, around the Tree of Life Synagogue in Pittsburgh, around the Walmart in El Paso, around the Tops Supermarket in Buffalo. All of these communities and many more have experienced tragedy at the hands of violent extremists who are armed not only with guns, but with the ideology of Christian nationalism. So what do we do about this? If we care about religious freedom for all, we must dismantle Christian nationalism. James Baldwin wrote, "Not everything that is faced can be changed, but nothing can be changed if it's not faced." We have to tell the truth about who we are. For some of us, that means telling the truth about what our ancestors did. For others, it means telling the truth about what our ancestors experienced. And for all of us, it will be an act of vulnerability, courage, and openness. We have to be willing to complicate a narrative that has given divine sanction to all kinds of evil committed in God's name. We have to be willing to understand that telling a more honest version of history is an act of patriotism, not an insult to it. And we have to call out the myth of the founding as a Christian nation as what it is, a lie that perpetuates white supremacy and bigotry. This is going to be hard. But if we do it, we will have the opportunity to tap into that ideal of religious freedom, that belonging in American society should never depend on what we believe or how we worship or how we identify religiously. And for those of us who are white Christians, We have to be willing to interrogate and understand how we have benefited from Christian nationalism. When I look back at that 18-year-old me in front of the VFW post, I understand why she was so starry-eyed about American democracy and freedom. Growing up white and Christian in Central Texas was not too hard. And I found a way of being Baptist that would affirm my calling as a woman. But since then, through time and experience, and most of all, relationship, I have come to appreciate how what I experienced as freedom is really Christian privilege, and how it is preventing my neighbors from having full religious freedom. Fannie Lou Hamer famously said, "Nobody's free until everybody's free." And I would add to her wise words, nobody's free until we dismantle Christian nationalism. This poison has been seeping for so long that the work to dismantle it will be long. It will take a concerted effort from a diverse coalition working together for everyone's freedom. And for those of us who are Christians, it gives us an opportunity to tap into whose we are, to lean into the gospel of love that can repudiate this false idol of power. And at Christians Against Christian Nationalism, we have developed resources for everyone to use to help have these conversations about Christian nationalism and the threat to American democracy, to freedom, to belonging, and to Christianity itself. Join us in this movement to fight Christian nationalism. And together, I believe we will finally be able to achieve religious freedom, not just for some, but for all.